So what did the KKK, the Russian government, and Nazi Germany all have in common? All three are in some way the result of a failure to reintegrate veterans back into peaceful society. The KKK was founded by Confederate veterans. The post-Soviet governments in Russia hired Afghan and Chechnyan war vets to get rid of opposition. And the Nazi Party was based around disaffected World War I vets. We've repeatedly seen that without reintegration of veterans, it's almost impossible to secure real peace. To secure peace, especially after civil wars, there exists a three-step process of DDR: disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. Reintegration, helping ex-combatants get jobs, housing, and support networks, is, quote, of necessity a slow process, unquote, and has in every single case of DDR been the hardest to accomplish. There have been some successes with reintegration, but those have always come with caveats, because though DDR reintegration can help on a large scale, it is demonstrably less effective on an individual level. For many ex-combatants, their only marketable skill is violence, making reintegrating back into a civilian economy extremely difficult. DDR faces major limitations in helping ex-combatants reintegrate economically. For example, Brendan Hughes, a famous IRA commander during the Northern Ireland Troubles, spent over a decade in British prisons. And between his trauma and his lack of civilian experience, he was never able to hold a steady job after dedicating so much of his life to a violent cause. And Hughes actually demonstrates one of the better fates one can hope for without DDR help. He was able to at least get by on welfare until his death, but in societies without welfare, ex-soldiers are often forced to sell their only skill, violence, in order to survive. To solve that problem, the obvious solution may appear to be job training. But remember, these are in areas devastated by war. In post-war Sierra Leone, Mozambique, and elsewhere, there weren't many people who could afford the services of mechanics, tailors, taxi drivers, and other specialists, meaning that graduates of DDR programs weren't actually able to support themselves with the skills they'd learned. If you think that farming might be a better alternative, that may be true to a certain extent, but there's only so much arable land, and many communities don't appreciate giving valuable land to ex-militants. And given that lack of access to land often drives people into militias or other armed groups, providing one group of ex-militants with land might be sowing the seeds of the next conflict. And at the same time, not making the attempt to help ex-combatants is bound to result in at least a sizable chunk of them becoming, like Hughes, burdens on an already strained support system, or worse, recidivist militants. Overall, it's most likely still better to provide as much aid as one can, but reintegration is an extremely delicate process that can, if things go wrong, end up hurting individuals who go through DDR. Furthermore, ex-combatants in civil conflicts face stigmatization by local communities for having participated in organizations that perpetrated violence. The mechanisms of DDR, providing jobs, training, education, and such, aren't very well suited to the fact that communities don't like the diversion of resources to ex-fighters and sometimes actual war criminals. There's a sense that those who have committed atrocities, or who are associated with those who have committed atrocities, are being rewarded for their actions, which fosters even more resentment. The main counter-argument I've seen in response to these concerns is that ex-combatants are often victims of armed groups who are as deserving of aid as anyone else. Take, for example, Ibrahim Duji, who was forcibly conscripted by Boko Haram. Like tens of thousands of ex-combatants who were abducted into militant groups or recruited at a young age, Duji didn't have a choice. But the issue is that while this counterargument is completely true, it doesn't convince the communities those groups terrorized. Members of Duji's hometown refused to let him return because the organization he was in murdered their families, even though he individually committed no atrocities. No amount of arguing about deservingness or the benefits of reintegration can overcome that level of grief or hate independent of essentially society-wide therapy. In fact, a 2007 study in the Journal of Conflict Resolution by McCartan Humphreys and Jeremy Weinstein found that the strongest predictor of individual reintegration success in Sierra Leone was not in individuals' participation in DDR, which was not found to have significant micro-level impacts, but whether or not they had been involved in a group with a reputation for committing atrocities. In the worldview of traumatized societies, categorical judgments are entirely reasonable, given what these societies have gone through, but they make the work of reintegration extraordinarily complicated. Reintegration programs are well suited to providing hard skills and rebuilding economies, but as demonstrated by Humphreys and Weinstein, it's the community that determines whether or not an ex-combatant can successfully reintegrate. And in a way, to help individual combatants reintegrate, the communities also need to be rehabilitated and reintegrated, which DDR does not do. So in conclusion, DDR can be effective, but we can't improve societies by focusing on one issue at a time. Almost all of the issues faced by society, endemic poverty, climate change, gun violence, and a litany of others, are connected. Focusing resources on just one section of what's really a connected web of greater issues is most likely not going to result in significant improvements, just as trying to rehabilitate ex-combatants without rehabilitating the societies they live in may not be effective.